This is the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast, where divorce coach Corey Shapiro helps you get creative and not reactive in your divorce. Tune in now and get the support you need to make it through this difficult time. Here's Corey Shapiro.
Welcome to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast. This is Corey Shapiro. Last week when I was re-listening to the episode, it seems I may have suggested that I know Bruce Willis's wife. The quote of the week was from Bruce Willis's wife. I don't know her. I got that quote on Google. I don't even know Bruce Willis, but of course I feel like I do since I've seen so many of his movies. All right, this week's podcast, as always, we're going to do our quote, we're going to do our question, we're going to do our divorce news, and we're going to hopefully lighten it up at the end because divorce is a heavy subject with our positive perspective. Our quote is from Rabbi Harold Kushner. We've done quotes from rappers, from the president, so we're moving to a rabbi who had some tragedy in his life. He lost his son when his son was only 14 years of age. He had that aging disease, progeria, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And after some time of healing, he wrote a book about it, which may be inspiring if someone's going through a major windstorm like he went through. I think it's called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. The quote goes like this: one of the basic needs of every human being is the need to be loved, to have our wishes and feelings taken seriously, to be validated as people who matter. I think this quote's important because we're trying to discuss victim mentality on this podcast and having more firm boundaries and retelling ourselves different stories, putting a positive spin on things. So I think that quote is powerful. All right, our question, it's a good question. It comes from Mari, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. It's a long question, so I'm just going to summarize it. Basically, she wasn't married to the father of her child. She put her last name as her child's last name. They finally got married. They changed the last name of the child to her husband's last name, which she didn't really want, but she did it, I guess, as a nice gesture. And unfortunately, the relationship did not last. They are in a divorce situation, and they agreed to very progressive, equal parenting time, joint decision making, and all she wants is to have a hyphenated last name. So not just the father's last name, it's hyphenated. And she says here in her question, I'm a mother as much as he's a father, and our child is still so young. He's 6. And doesn't have strong ties to his last name yet. And she wants to know my perspective. This may be particular to a jurisdiction. There might be some laws on this. My take on it is that it's a best interest standard. And what that means, and we know what that necessarily means, is what, if you're in court, what a judge thinks that means. Why is it important for a child? And here, I'm not hearing any high value to this last name. It's just value, just personal reasons. But if you're in this context and you don't really have a financial budget, you might try to do something outside of court. If you can do mediation or collaborative divorce, these are what these are for. And it doesn't necessarily matter that he's resisting it up front, because a good mediator can try to move past that. And the way they do it is trying to give that person understanding. Like, so if they came into a session and the father says, no, I'm not going to agree to that. The last name is my last name. That's the way it should be. The mediator would say, yeah, I mean, it's important to you to have that legacy, to have that respect, to have that identity, and make the father feel like he's understood, that he's heard. And if it's done right, maybe after a process, they can change their position. So I hope you can do this in a mediation context, because the judge may have to hold a hearing. It's up to the judge. If you're in a conference with the judge and you can just ask the judge your opinions, and the judge is like, oh, yeah, I believe in hyphenated names, no problem, that would be great. But if the judge is more traditional, then it might be a climb, even though I think it makes sense to me. And remember, if you have a question for the podcast, you can go to gettingdivorced.org. You can ask a question right from the browser, and hopefully we can answer it on the podcast. Divorce News really hits home on this idea of taking responsibility for your actions and try not to be in a victim mentality. And I saw this recent article from CNBC. It said 9 things to think about to take control of your life, and what more emotionally secure people would say. And I think the first few of them, and I'll put a link in the show notes, but I think the first few of them are really important. So let's do the first one, which is, let me think about that before I respond. Let me repeat that. Let me think about that before I respond. If you can just do that, as opposed to just sending over a reactive text or a reactive email or responding rashly, and just say, let me think about that before I respond, and see if it's even worthy of a real response later on, I think you're really moving to the top of the class. I think that's really helpful, because our feelings are so strong that sometimes we do things that don't help us in the long term. The second one, it's a 1-syllable word. It's hard for some people to say. Some people overuse it, but it's no. No. And it's okay to say no. It's okay to put your needs first. It's okay to set boundaries at times. Not all the time, but at times. And the third one I thought was really helpful, because sometimes these parenting plans, especially, there's some flexibility. And if you feel a little being taken advantage of, how about just saying, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with that. So hopefully some of these sayings you can remember, you can really take to heart. You can use it to create boundaries. You can move into a ownership mentality and out of a victim mentality. And that's really what my hope is for everyone who's going through a divorce, to take ownership. All right, so we are up to our positive perspective. Let's try to end on a positive note. I know it's a heavy subject talking about boundaries and talking about a victim mentality. The positive perspective is there's so much you can do in your response if you have a response. If you have a response. But if you're only going to react in that split second, then it may not necessarily help you in the long run. So the positive perspective is slow down. Use one of those sayings. Let's engage our big brain thinking. And then hopefully it will help us in this divorce. All right, that's a wrap in today's episode. We had that quote to deal with a major windstorm, like Rabbi Kushner, who passed away earlier this year. I think he was in his 80s, maybe even in his 90s. He was up there, late 80s. And the question about name change and what a creative idea. It seems rather simple to me to just have a hyphenated last name, sort of like where we move from maybe sole custody to joint custody, and now a presumption of basically 50-50 in most jurisdictions. And the divorce news really helping us take ownership and move out of a victim mentality, and the positive perspective, just reinforcing this idea of slowing down and having a response. So I hope you found this podcast informative. Next week, we're going to be discussing financial issues, specifically with college.
Thank you for tuning in to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast with divorce coach Corey Shapiro. Divorce can be a difficult and overwhelming process, but it doesn't have to be. Corey's book is here to help you gain clarity, composure, and a strategic mindset. Get it now as an ebook on Amazon or an audiobook on Audible, and unlock the power of these resources to make more informed decisions and gain a better understanding of the process.
This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.